Blackwood Manor was built in the late 1700s. Over time, the farmhouse was expanded and then the outbuildings added. As typical for the period, the smokehouse, privy, springhouse, and blacksmith shop were built relatively close, but not so close that the sense or noise would disturb the household. A forever family lived in the house and worked the farm. Like all that came before, the Lindens took care of the land and livestock beyond what was necessary to keep the acreage. Land was not just what supported the family, but a parcel to be, if not glorified, then certainly polished. Though, if the land belonged to the family, then who or what walked, rode, or drove wagons in the night that made the house shake and the shutters bang? There is no local knowledge or documented lore of travails, terrors, or tragedies on the land or in the house, save for a tale that an old man was confined to the living room via his deathbed so as not to die in a bedroom. The original family cemetery itself is untouched and extends into present day. Yet sightings and occurrences have been widely reported, covered, and investigated, and without fail every contact, helper, and visitor professed in interviews knew, believed, or was absolutely certain something terrible must have happened there. 4 people are mysteriously invited as dinner guests by a supposed friend to Blackwood Manor. As the night unfolds, they begin to understand the true history of the home, and it isn't pretty. Blackwood Manor has a long, sordid history, and it was built on the blood of others. Blackwood Manor is an old mansion that is said to be haunted. Will a group of strangers be able to find out why so many people don't last a single night in it? Couples Marie and Frank are engaged, and a secret that may destroy their relationship. Hannah and Cian are both trying to deal with the death of Hannah's late husband. Blackwood Manor, named after Bartholomew Blackwood, was commissioned to be built following his return from the Civil War. It is said that the evil within the manor is responsible for him meeting his untimely end. Rumor has it that multiple generations of Blackwoods came and went as the grounds turned into a public park. Reports of amusement, deaths, and ghosts and other strange occurrences have fueled Blackwood Manor's history over the years. The guests will explore the history room, where they can learn all of this. They will also find an icon that goes back a few hundred years. Residents at the manor have all reported a weather phenomenon outside. Every resident has their own version of what happens next and how the evening transpired. One of the inexplicable things they all remember is an ominous dialogue followed by a shape manifesting. The group doesn't remember, but know they can't take it lightly and must focus their attention on the mystery of Blackwood Manor in order to get through the night. Blackwood Manor and its adjoining lands had been on the market for years by the time James Johnson noticed the listing in the front window of the local realtors. It was clear how desperate the previous owners had been to sell when Johnson saw the amount they had been willing to let Blackwood go for. It was a price too good to be true, he admitted to his wife Judith, but it was far too good to even pass up the opportunity to have a look. For the young family of 5, it was everything and soon. It would become much more than that. That morning, James had decided to pluck up enough courage to do something he had never done before and make the trip up to the manor. He took his wife with him to see what she thought of the place. The pair drove up from the capital of Clifton in their little Volkswagen Golf, with their 3 young children, Amelia, Edward, and Ruby, in the back. Surprisingly, Judith was just as thrilled with the place as he was. It was like a dream, she said. Both of them had been in awe. A week later, and they were all in attendance to finalize the papers. The family took their first steps into Blackwood Manor and were enamored before they were through the threshold. A series of corridors sprawled before them in an enormous castle, and their echo brought forth excitement, happiness, and freedom. It was more than any of them had ever had before. Blackwood Manor seems like the perfect place for ghost stories, yet when growing up in Waynesboro, GA, I never heard of any legends surrounding my spooky old family home. It's likely that the lack of stories was due to the fact that no one had lived in that house for more than 6 months for several years. That is, until the Johnson family moved in. When I was 11, old enough to notice certain things that adults would disregard, and perhaps old enough to be more in tune with the unexplainable. My family struck a deal with the owner of Blackwood Manor after they had already been trying to sell the place, by that time, for at least 5 or 6 years. It sported a low price and a 13-acre yard and ink-black pond that would have my little sister and me in awe, so we decided to rent with the idea of buying held in sight if we should enjoy it. Blackwood Manor sprawls like an aging yet stately spider on the corner of a block in one of the oldest neighborhoods in all of the central Georgia town. Houses crafted before and just after the turn of the century attempt to outdo one another with their cedar siding, brick facades, and wrap-around verandas, apparently all in an effort to show off to gape-mouthed visiting yokels. The two-story front of the Union Avenue Manor sits almost, yet not quite, flush against the sidewalk before zigging back to the familiar overhang of the first of two wide porches and zagging again back, upward and toward the north of the manor. Spectre-like splotches, in yellow, slate blue, maroon, sea foam green, and black, now stood testament to several layers of poor skilled paint jobs under the ancient eaves. Deterioration from either nature or flame-filled history beheld the wide planks from underneath. Unexplained phenomena. Robert had been living in Blackwood Manor for a week before anything odd occurred. At first, unexplained noises and other minor inconveniences made him wonder if he was right to move in with such short notice, or if it might even be better to cut his losses and admit that maybe the place was too good to be true. One of his earliest and most minor annoyances was when he woke one Sunday morning to find the carpet outside of his room was drenched through. He could feel the sogginess of it beneath his slippers. He chalked it up to early damage, but the noise he heard played on his mind all day. There was the door creaking, your usual groan experienced when the hotel elevator slips up a floor. Although, if there was an elevator that could make it all the way up to the mezzanine, he wasn't complaining. The radio hadn't been a problem before, either. He would turn it to a frequency with the least amount of snow, and when he was hard at work, he'd sing along to the station, occasionally hurt by the sound of the strings. Johnny got lost, Johnny got lost. He'd sing tunelessly but enthusiastically. The off-key notes had earned a couple of knocks at his door early on to complain, but that was the most human interaction he had with any other tenant. Despite it all, he had managed to go a week without anyone butting heads with him about the racket, minus a few shy scuffs later in the week and this newly discovered waterlogged carpet. With this happening after a smooth few days of the radio, he could only think it was rusted, or maybe those neighbors on the other side of his wall finally up and left out of fear. The madly swinging pendulum relentlessly ticked the hours of the night away one by one. It was some unearthly hour of the night when everyone's fears are closest to the surface. The household, bathed in moonlight, lay steeped in tranquility. Comforted by silence, the residents slept safe in their beds. Yet silence at Blackwood Manor was never what it seemed. There were frequently strange noises in the night, but all too often their cause could never be determined come the light of day. The dining room wall bulged out like an enormous, unevenly cast brow with two unaligned eyes of glass staring across the valley at the smudges of light marking out the surrounding villages and the moonlit mountains behind. Inside the room, the vibration of the clock going upstairs had long been making the glasses of water tremble against their coasters. Below stairs in the warm, tiny kitchen at the back of the house, the clock could be heard distortedly forcing time through the restricted air. Bright beams of light rose into dozens of slow curls and drifts of steam from the kettle as the maid began to draw off poached eggs, sending little trailing flows in her wake over the new granite work surface, the shiny chrome griddle, and down to the speckled lino. The clock relented and let in the distant sound of a car engine fading away down the quiet lane outside. Then it started up again. Unsurprisingly, the manor at the top of the hill was nothing compared to my dreams of it. It was black and decrepit, charred beams jutting out at all angles like shattered bones. How it had been allowed to fall into such a state of disrepair was beyond me. Such a magnificent house was now nothing more than a shell, an unsafe haven for the creatures of the woods. As if the sight of the mansion weren't enough to signal us to pack up what little we had and head back home, more unnerving was the information I managed to gather about the Blackwood family and their estate. Sit down for a story, won't you? It's an old tale, and sure, you've likely heard at least 15 different versions of it, but that's what this sort of story is meant to be. It exists as a constant echo, unaltered by time. It speaks to a part of us that has phantoms in our blood, and for those of us unfortunate enough to reside near the town of Blackwood, in fact, in those very clothes these tales hang upon, we've got plenty of phantoms laying dormant in the ashes of the hearth to tell and retell the story. We are nothing if not creatures of habit after all, but let's not know our way about just yet. You've only just settled in. Poor dear, Blackwood has a history, and for every other house that lines its winding and trodden paths, there's a shadow of a ghost lurking within. Some wear white, others drag heavy chains around their ankles, and the sound of the wind whispering against their hollowed-out compounds is almost enough to drown out the drip, drip, drip of blood on wooden floors that is ever ringing in anyone fortunate enough to visit the sleepy little Connecticut town. For tonight, we'll start with the most famous of these phantoms. The Lady in White, she who once terrorized Blackwood with her malevolent presence and who made the manor of the same name home. And on nights just like this, with the rain pelting the decaying structure, legend has it that the mist of the lady fills the abode with her distressing screams. Smothered as they are by the wind, however, all but the most careful of ears walk right past and will never even hear the blood-curdling cries as it reaches out to unhinge the reputations of those that reside there today. Paranormal investigators from SPITE, or spectral paranormal investigators and testers of ectoplasm, arrived on the scene after being called by the caretaker, Jameson. 3 people came on behalf of SAPI, 2 men and a woman. They arrived in a white vehicle. Jameson announced them before stepping aside to allow them into the property. These experts of the supernatural had been dispatched to ascertain if the house and its goings-on were, in fact, haunted. Christina could tell that once these professionals had been hired, the air within the house had somewhat changed. Now, the underlying attitude was replaced with a sense of urgency. The preliminary results reported to Christina and Camden indicated that the house was, as they suspected, teeming with unusual energy. These people's complaints all seemed to be consistent with the findings of these specialists. Their results pointed to an exceptionally large amount of paranormal activity, both in terms of concentration and intensity, and even went so far as to specify certain levels of ghostliness. A more in-depth exploration required extensive studies, according to their report. It was also implied throughout the text that their services would come at a costly expense. They would need the commitment of Christine and her husband for 2 days. According to the written copy of their report, they declared they would maintain a low profile and try their hardest to cause no disruption, but they did warn that strange noises and odd lights would be probable. The friends discussed their idea to hire a medium and rack their brains at coffee and meals to identify a candidate with the correct combination of gullibility, failed repute, and total psychic prevarication. This resulted in several near misses, but finally their persistence combined with careful newspaper clippings, Google research, and hours spent finding and sussing the perfect candidate named Rosamund Mooney on the Upper East Side. Because her shop had some vaguely Zen shingle hanging from it, the wood was imported from the branches of the actual Ort in which Zeus and his precious Ganymede first met. This Rosamund Mooney would not, think anything new. Old the time traveler and knew the original minds. They were perfect, Marcus Sargent declared after the interview. No talent, just memory. It's brilliant. The lot of them gathered at 202nd and Vern Avenue, actually a 31st story in a tower at 5th Avenue and 21st, for 6 p.m. on a Friday night. Thing is, said Aidan Chandler, vice president of Nil Hilo Fitzmenior Pfefferguiden Placey, as he considered his glass of rum. I mean, it's improbable. He let this elaboration linger like you would Santos Dominican Churchill Toro in his mouth before drawing it softly to its end. In Chapter 5, the group experiences a steady escalation in amounts and intensity of haunting. While previously, all experienced the paranormal phenomena in a far-reaching yet distinct and separate manner, terror now started to directly implant its malevolent claws into the fabric of their minds. Elena, for instance, began to live through a seemingly maladaptive fear of death, which in the prime of Enrico's cruel play actually became a physical possibility. Although the perceived source of her fright was indeed imaginative, the horror reached her so strongly that her nervous system was incapable of creating counteracting hormones and putting her body into fight or flight mode. Elena instead began to experience the loss of control over her mind and body. She developed severe agoraphobia since everywhere outside of her home or Blackwood safe house reminded her of Blackwood Manor and triggered her phobia. Terror crept ever more in her face and movements, until Enrico finally discarded her. Alcester allowed an ever stronger manifestation of his darker side during the seances, proving his mental and psychological state to be far more affected by the spiritual planes than he would ever have admitted. Edward, in turn, stopped taking notice of anything that happened around him and even hid in the arms of his demon, which he preferred over company. Mary developed a heavy dip in her mental and emotional condition and began experiencing panic attacks of great proportion. All the while, the phenomena showed a substantial escalation with new surprises and upsetting behavior never before displayed. These apparitions are making a showing of their presence. On 12 of the 20 newly scanned images, shadowy figures appear in the hallway once the door is ajar. They all appear to be male, their blurry features, height, and shape almost identical. If it wasn't for the light source behind them, these figures would blend right into the shadowy background. Oddly, they possess no distinct features, and although it's impossible to pinpoint any facial expressions, the amorphous expression of unmistakable dread can be detected in the tales of many a house guest who has decided to abandon their senses and give Blackwood Manor a visit. Lo and behold, we had two brave souls regain their senses and bolt from the house in horror upon seeing them. A length of time wasn't specified, as they were too busy boarding up the exit to provide an atea. What does stand out about our apparitions is the peace, or lack thereof, connecting neck to head. The eerie hallway figures' heads in these photos look as though they've been dropped on top of their collarbones like some kind of possessive, faceless Mr. Potato Head. Not all is grim in our lane, though. 2 other snapshots, 3, counting the brief flicker, do not contain any apparition at all. The question to be asked, of course, is why and how these entities present themselves when the door is ajar. Is there something to be seen on further examination past this open portal? The dark manor loomed in front of us as we approached. We could hear the sounds of the wind and rain, though no storm could be felt from outside. I raised the key to Ebenor that the old man had given to me and fitted it into the lock of the oak door. With a heavy heart and an equal feeling of dark determination, we ventured into the hall. All sounds of the storm grew quiet as the door sealed shut. The old man who met us at the door stayed, but not to guide us. Instead, he merely bid us to press on before he retreated back to the ash beyond the door. Going room by room, we saw what had once been left behind in ages long gone. A forge lay silent, the bellows rusted shut. A battle waged in one of the rooms between Nectarix and the Dracosiras. Nellie's vengeful energy filled a room while skeletons tore into each other. It was a gruesome display, but we pressed on until we found her at last in what we assumed to be the closet, standing among mannequins frozen in fear. "I cannot go with you," she admitted. "My ties to all of this now are too strong. There is a way for me to be made to live again hidden beyond here but a final time, and we will need to find it and make the most of it." She seemed almost pained to have said this as we pressed on into the rest of the hidden abode at Blackwood, but as we each moved through the rooms, searching for what we assumed would bring an end to our quest, Linnea stumbled across a secret chamber. Even she had been unaware of this patch of the house in all her years of watching. The body of the astromancer from her visions lay hidden there, and with it, a figure in a white robe. She sparkled with magic and was whispered of love by the spirit of Blackwood that had given her life. But this was no time for such stories. Mary was not the only spirit that haunted the manor, or more accurately, she was not the only victim. And as we all experienced together, this fact was made shockingly and forcibly clear. Heidi, David, Leanne, and I had split up to search every room in the manor that we had not already searched. I checked a room on the 2nd floor not far from the grand stairway. I would soon come to know my own room as the naturalist room, and became horrified at the items within. No doubt they were his or left behind by Mary or both. As my friends and I searched the rooms, I made careful note not to open the wardrobe in my own room. David came to my door and beckoned me to follow him. We went to the room to discover that, as I had suspected, the naturalist's desk was in this room as well as the dining room downstairs. Among his things, we discovered an old tin. It was full of black and white photos and postcards. We spread them out on the floor, and to our amazement, found that Mary was in the photos, many different photos. In some, the baby was there. In others, they were all together, including Fletcher. She seemed happy enough, tugging along on her mother's skirts as Mary chatted with the doctor behind them, and squalling away as Fletcher tried to calm her down during a messy diaper change. Through all that she'd gone through, that baby might be the only thing keeping Mary tethered to the earth, if she had lost her so many years ago. God only knows what might have happened. The events that transpired inside Blackwood Manor will forever be etched in the history of Ebonhurst and in the memory of all who live nearby. On one chilling Halloween, the spirits of long-dead former residents invaded the dreams and nightmares of the citizens of the sleepy town. The identity of the force behind the horror was never discerned, whether it was the master of the house, who had gone mad with what he believed to be knowledge of the afterlife, or if the female entity drafted into his service had somehow managed to wrest control of him. Some of the spirits were able to be laid to rest, such as the ever-weeping ghost of a bereaved mother. Who or what it was that had lain waiting in the Beckett family mausoleum was never ascertained. The encroaching pall of death had gone, and the palpable atmosphere of living choking Blackwood Manor was no more, if it had ever even been. As time wore on, the events of the Verswaflungspoka began to recede from the minds of Ebenhurstians, consigned to that deep pit in the lonely plains of local legend history. Then one day, the Blackwood place went up in smoke, consumed by a blaze that had taken a century to find its feet. There were none who mourned it. The effects of the haunting of Blackwood Manor continue to unfold within the lives of the direct survivors and the descendants of the deceased. Though the phenomenon lay dormant for 80 years, the house's memories and ghostly inhabitants are far from put to rest. Could any witness stand with conviction and say that the effects have been exorcised permanently? The lives that were touched and ruined have not been documented, though not for lack of trying. The notoriety of Blackwood Manor still thrives not in its dusty halls, but in the gems of overproduced films and the pages of sensational tabloid-style articles. None who stand to profit will approach the estate again, and like a curious relic, it attracts only the occasional investigators and supernatural historian. The many reports and television programs that have ventured inside since then have not discovered anything remarkable, save for one known group of parapsychologists who reported ghostly auras in the wine cellar. Statement's official statement would be that the haunted state of Blackwood Manor could not confidently be established by the statements of authentically unhinged teenagers, though the individual's records tell a different story. The exact nature of the residual hauntings' effect on the time within the demarcated exploration zone is of great interest. Are some of the previous ghostly inhabitants still present in the house, affecting the events around every 10-hour loop? In light of our agent's expertise, statement is likely correct in assuming that the normal rules of possession, communication, and time travel have been disrupted by the presence of Apollyon.